How to make your Jato faster. This is the third video in the series. In the first and second video, I talked about, well, I firstly want to mention safety. It's very important that you get a good set of brakes and that you have a good understanding of the vehicle and where you're running it and how to control it. You have to be in control all the time. The second that you're not in control, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. Just going fast isn't worth hurting someone or damaging property. Okay, this is a hobby, but you want to be responsible. This can do a lot more than some other basic hobbies. And also you can hurt yourself, you can burn yourself very badly. So know what you're doing. So anyway, the first and second video, I talked about tuning your vehicle. Now essentially this mainly goes to getting your gear ratio with this. Open that up, tighten it with the hex screw, maybe no more than a quarter of a turn at a time, lefty loosey or righty tighty, adjusting your gear ratio. You don't want to go too far with this because it's hard to go back once you've gone too far. You want to get a good shift point, maybe after 5, 6, 7, 10, 11, 12 seconds of full throttle, you shift into second gear. Depending on where you are and what you're trying to do, getting that shift point is very important. Also, adjusting your slipper clutch tightness, holding this down and then tightening or loosening this. Too loose and you won't shift. Too tight, you'll be putting the power down too much. You'll be popping wheelies way too much. And also, getting a good suspension setup. Maybe you want to move these up or down. Maybe you want to put a thicker oil in the front. Maybe you want to put a thinner oil in the back, depending on what kind of surface, if it's bumpy, if it's not. If this is very thick and you hit a bump and it's coming up, you might want to change the springs also. We also talked about the gearing. That's very important, but also what you can do, this is a new addition, is you can change the pinion and the spur gear here. Smaller gear here, bigger gear there. It'll just look it up for the best area. I mean, maybe you want to go flat out top speed. Then you'd want a very small gear here and a very big gear here, but then you'd have very slow acceleration. So if you don't have a big area, that's not going to be ideal. And also I talked about in the first video, the air filter. You want to get a good air filter. This one doesn't fit on the body very well, but I like it a lot because I have a lot of these filters. You want the engine to breathe, okay? That's a big deal. If you have those little plug filters, especially if it gets a little bit dirty, the air can only go in one way. And on top of that, there's not very good airflow inside the body anyway. So your engine is going to not have the right amount of air and it's going to be running very hot and your tune is going to be off. So in the second video, I talked about the tires, how important the tires are. And also the carburetor. Maybe you go to a bigger carburetor, any bigger standard, like a low C carburetor for like 20, 30, 40 bucks. That will do excellent here. It'll fit no problem. I also talked about the exhaust. Maybe change the exhaust in the manifold. That'll make a big difference. Let's see, what else? Oh yeah, I talked about the weight. The lighter it is, the better. And most importantly, throughout the first and the second video, I talked about tuning. It's very important to learn how to tune the high speed and then the low speed. Those are very important to learn how they work and how they affect you. And change a little bit at a time and get comfortable with it. You're going to need to know how to do that for the rest of your Nitro RC life. I mean, a lot of people switch over to electric just because they don't want to take the time to learn to tune. It makes a big difference and it's very satisfying when you get a good tune. I also talked about the battery, getting the battery moved in the middle. Now I'm running a little bit long. That's just a quick summary. All those things should be able to get you more than enough of what you want and your improvements and all that. But now this is the third video. This is a little bigger. This is the maximum. You've already done this. You've been working at it for months. This is what you need to do to get that little extra 5 miles an hour, 1 mile an hour, 2, 3, 4 miles an hour. This is what you're going to have to do. The body, first off, aerodynamics. At this point, it's going to be affecting it. Maybe get a different body that's just solid. No holes, better aerodynamics. At the same time, you want to screw these all the way up. Lower the ride height, make it as close to the ground as possible. That way you have better aerodynamics, low pressure here and a high pressure going over the top. You have better aerodynamics overall. That's what you want. You want to have the least amount of resistance as possible. In addition to that, run 30% fuel. This is why I say tuning is so important, because when you switch over to 30%, it's going to be very difficult to tune. It's going to be much more on a knife edge. So if you have no understanding and you go to 30%, it's going to be a freaking nightmare. You might want to add weight. It sounds counterintuitive, but if you add a little bit more weight in the front and you're full throttle all the time, no worries, you'll actually be going faster. That's why I said take off the wheelie bar, because you don't want to be at that point where you're fighting a wheelie. If you're fighting a wheelie, then you're not going full speed. You want to be having the right tune so that you can be full throttle without it going. The perfect speed run is actually going to be very boring. It's not going to be exciting. It's going to look very smooth, and that's how you get those high speeds. The last thing, or the second last thing, is your bearings. It might not sound like a big deal, but to get that little 5%, it is a big deal, especially if you've never done a bearing change or cleaned any bearings. So you can buy a new bearing set. This is what everything rotates on. You can buy a new bearing set, or you can just clean your bearing set. There's an RPM jig that holds a bearing, and then you spray your motor or electric cleaner on there, and then you dab it up with some new oil, and then it's like a new bearing. Or if you don't want to do all that or invest in the oil or the jig, just buy a new bearing set. It'll make a big difference, especially if you've had it for a while. The very, very last thing is also related to safety. One of the most important things. You may want to change the receiver and the controller, because I've noticed there's a lot of lag with this system, especially once you start getting out there. Sometimes it's like this, and then 2, 3, 4 seconds go by, and then it gives throttle. That's very unsafe. You're not in control of the vehicle at that point, especially if you're that far away, which you are going to be if you're going fast. I mean, 60 miles per hour is very, very fast. I mean, in 1 second you travel a large distance, especially something small like this, you can't very well see it. So that's a big concern. So the Aerotronics receiver, and I mean, that's what I really recommend. I mean, they're not called Aerotronics anymore. It's like Sanwa or something. That's really what I recommend. You can get a good set for like $100, which is a transmitter and a receiver. I mean, you lose all the Bluetooth stuff with the other transmitter, but I think it's a very good purchase. So those things in combination to everything I've summarized, with being responsible, safe, and in control, you should be able to max it out. I'll make more videos of my updates and upgrades, but for now, I think that can go pretty far.